My name is Chris Manning, and this is Liberty's Last Refuge. And today we're going to be talking about the Israeli-Gaza war and how it has absolutely broken the brains of some of the most reasonable people. Just in the same way that many people had their brains broken by Donald Trump's running for presidency and election. So we don't have a catchphrase yet for this syndrome that has unfortunately infected many of the most reasonable people on the internet. There is no TDS, but this would be TDS for the Israeli war. And today I'm going to focus mostly on unfortunately Zaid Jilani. Now, I really like Zaid. Many times I said Zaid is the most reasonable person on Twitter, and this was true up until about 6 months ago. I'm baffled by the fact that Zaid, who has always been able to see through the bullshit, cannot comprehend that Hamas is doing nothing but lying all the time about the casualties and what Israelis are doing, and he can't see it. And because of this, he has started to attack other people who I'm sure he would have considered friends. If you follow Zaid, you see his most recent dust up with Matt Taibbi, where he accuses Matt of the same thing all the leftists are saying, that Elon Musk paid him and he sold out. Why? Because Matt Taibbi said he's going to focus more on Democrat misdeeds rather than Republicans. And Zaid just couldn't handle that. So I'm going to shed a little bit of light on just some of the most obvious lies which Hamas has perpetrated in this war that I can show. So just to start, though, I want to show you that, yes, in fact, I do like Zaid, and I hope he comes back to reality, and I hope he gets to touch some grass, and maybe he'll look at this. I doubt he will, but maybe he will, and he might question some of his actions over the last couple months. So let's first talk about my appreciation for Zaid. So here are just a couple of my tweets in the past where I've talked about how Zaid is one of my favorite follows, and this thread that he posted, I don't know if it was a food post or what, but you know, I liked his food takes. I think they're funny. I also think he does a very good job of cutting through the bullshit on both right and left on the propaganda that they state and getting to the reality. He understands that people who are conservative aren't evil like many of his friends on the left think. And I truly believed he's one of the most reasonable people on Twitter. Never has a hot take, always understands nuance beyond policy decisions, and that there are trade-offs. So I am not making this because I dislike Zaid. I truly do like Zaid. I think it was outside of Israel, I think he's still doing a good job, except for, of course, some of the libel he's engaged in lately. But again, this is coming from somebody who appreciates Zaid and hopes that he gets back to the person that he was prior to the Gaza-Israel war. So the first thing that I'm going to go over are the most obvious lies that Hamas has perpetrated and that many people who have taken the anti-Israel position believe was the bombing at the hospital in October 16 of 2023. This is the one where one of the Hamas militants fired a rocket which fell short and landed in the Hamas at the hospital parking lot, which then Hamas promptly blamed on Israel and said 471 people were killed. Now, this is just an absolutely preposterous number. Okay, this rocket is maybe a 200-pound rocket total, and that's not 200 pounds of explosive material. It's 200 pounds total. So maybe there are 50 to 60 pounds worth of explosives and obviously propellant, the fuel, and liquid fuel for the rocket motor. That's what burned up in this attack. It was one of the rockets that they made from the water pipes that they dug up from the ground and filled with explosives, fell out of the sky and landed at the hospital. And so this is just a reminder, we actually do have video of that impact. I want to show you what that impact looked like. Okay, that sound you heard was the rocket motor. And there's the impact at the hospital. As you see, there's a fire burning. It's pretty obvious single attack. And here you see from the roof. I'm going to pause it right here. Okay, so this is the hospital complex right here. and this is the parking lot in front of it, and you can see it's mostly fire damage. As you can see, there's almost no structural damage to the buildings at all at this point. Now, I think the most important thing is to provide a little perspective on what that explosion looked like versus explosions that have actually killed hundreds of people. And so I want to start with a more recent one that is one of the most shocking explosions I've ever witnessed. And that was the explosion in the Beirut port a couple years ago. So just as a reminder, a little over 200 people were claimed to have died in this explosion. Now that number seems accurate given the fact that there was a slow burn going on and people could leave the immediate danger area. But this massive explosion was so much larger than anything you will ever see in the Gaza war. There is a shockwave that travels probably a good couple, 2 or 3 miles from the impact zone. Buildings hundreds of meters away are leveled. Okay, but that is not what you see in the aftermath of the hospital bombing. So as a reminder, here was that Beirut bombing.
You can see white flashes, what appear to be fireworks, going off before the massive explosion. A former port worker told the Guardian newspaper he warned for years it was a disaster waiting to happen and says nothing was done.
So that was several 100,000 pounds of explosives going off. As you can see, nothing like what we saw with the misfired rocket, where Hamas's health ministry claims 471 people died. Again, completely unbelievable. Now, I want to show you another reason why this is completely unbelievable is because that 471 deaths would make this the second deadliest non-nuclear explosion in human history. Now, do I believe that a 200-pound rocket with maybe 50 pounds of fuel was the second deadliest explosion in human history that wasn't nuclear? Of course not. I don't, because I have some common sense. Now, I want to show you the aftermath of the deadliest explosion, single explosion in human history that was not a nuclear weapon. Now, in this explosion, over 500 people are killed, and this happened outside of Mogadishu in Somalia. A truck or van carrying several tens of thousands of pounds of explosives parked next to a fuel tanker. So those fuel tankers that filled up the gas stations and detonated there. So that explosion wouldn't have been as massive as it was if it wasn't for the additional fuel that detonated as well. And this was the aftermath of that explosion.
maanta dhamaysa waxyaabaha kala duwan ee ka dhacayeen Muqdisho tii ugu xumeed bay tii shala dhacday waxaan indhahayga ku arkay anigu saqiira madaxiis oo ilaa hadda wax sheeganaan waa madax go'an intii kala aawan hooyadiis dadta waxaan maqlay asaga iyo laba kale inay waday madaxdoodii go'een.
So I'm going to back it up a second right here. So this was a hotel that was sitting right next to where the explosion took place. As you can see, it's completely leveled. It is destroyed. And this is what led to so many casualties, is that this building collapsed in addition to the utter destruction for nearly an entire city block. Now, as you will see here when I go over the post-blast damage assessment of the hospital bombing, there is almost no structural damage. So again, another reason why we should discard and disbelieve what the Hamas is saying as far as the casualty counts. Again, I want you to keep those prior images in your mind when I go over the battle damage assessment of the hospital bombing. And of course, here in the U.S., we had the Oklahoma City bombing, where 168 people were killed and several hundred more were injured. As you see, in order to get these sort of casualty counts, you have got to have an explosion that is so powerful that buildings are destroyed and people are killed in them. That is how you get these mass casualty events in the bombing. That clearly does not happen in the hospital bombing. So this is a thread going over the post-impact from the next day. As you can see, here's the parking lot where the vehicles were. And I want to point out in this photo here, here and here are where the people were taking refuge. They were camping out and sleeping on the grass in these locations. The impact crater is about here. And as you can see, it's mostly burned. So there's obviously some impact at these vehicles here from the rocket falling. But as you can see, just 20, 30 feet away, these vehicles are not damaged. None of the buildings in the surrounding area are leveled or destroyed. They sustain superficial damage. As we scroll through, you can see that here's the impact point, and he gives a rough estimate. Now, on this early estimate, his impact point's a little bit off. It's closer to here, but still it shows the point that about 10 meters from the impact point, there's not a lot of damage. Here was the IDF releasing the images. And again, here's the surrounding area. As you see, all the buildings are still intact. And just doing this simple analysis, he estimated, for the 471 people to have been killed, you needed everybody standing at the impact point like this. Now, that's obviously not what happened. So in short, Hamas clearly overstates the number of casualties that were killed in this bombing. Obviously, they also attribute it to the IDF, even though it was Hamas's or Islamic Jihad's own rocket that killed these Palestinians. But of course, that number is added to the 32,000 that Zaid and many others like him, like Aaron Mate and Brianna Joy Gray and Ryan Grimm, and all of them claim were the deaths of, or the cause by Israel. Of course, it wasn't. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. So Zaid, if this rocket were to fall in the middle of a Georgia Bulldog home football game, you still wouldn't get 471 casualties. You wouldn't get 471 deaths. Okay, there's not enough explosives. It wasn't a large enough area for that to happen. Now, in order for you to get even more than 100 casualties, deaths, and several hundred injured, you would have to have that density as you would at a college football game. Okay, this is not what happened. In my best estimate, the real fatality number is probably somewhere between 50 and 75. I think that would actually be more realistic, given the amount of explosive material, the area of the damage, and where the impact point was. Now, one of the next claims that the Hamas Health Ministry made that had multiple deaths was the IDF attacking a ambulance. And this happened right around November, towards I think the end of October, into November, where the IDF did claim that they did hit an ambulance with a drone or with a missile strike. Now, the video that was put out and that the Hamas Health Ministry claimed was the ambulance that was hit was not. What that was at the same day, prior to the IDF saying that they had hit an ambulance, which they claim Hamas fighters were using to shuttle from location to location. The ambulance that has actually made all the news hit a horse pulling a cart full of people. And I was on this early. I debunked this claim pretty early, and I'm going to go through in detail showing you that, in fact, yes, the ambulance that Hamas claimed was hit by the IDF actually was involved in a car accident where it hit a horse. Now, I spent 3 years as an insurance adjuster looking at accident claims, so I do have a basis of knowledge to give you a little bit of investigative analysis of car accidents, because I did it for 3 years. It was my job. Now, here's just a warning. This video that I'm going to show you is extremely graphic. You will be able to. There will be quite a bit of blood. There will be several obvious broken bones to people's legs and hips, and people with head injuries. This video I'm going to show you, again, this is a warning. It is extremely graphic, so if you don't handle the sight of blood or broken bones well, please go ahead and fast forward a couple seconds through this section. This was reported by Thomas Van Lynch, the scene of the ambulance that was supposedly hit by the Israelis. There you see the ambulance and the people being pulled out, lots of people trying to help the wounded. As you can see here, that is a very clear broken leg in that young man. The body's over there on the side. But I want you to notice there's no blast damage, there's no fire, there's no smoke, there's nothing indicating an actual missile strike that had hit the area. As we get to the front of the vehicle, you see an impact point and fluid leakage from the car accident. And when he comes around, you can see the second vehicle is hit. And here is the dead horse with the cart still attached to it. So here is another photo from that accident scene. As you can see, the impact point here at the front right, there's a flat tire. The side mirror is damaged, but all the glass is intact. You have the normal fracturing of the glass when you have a car accident. And right here is the horse that was hit and then later killed. Now, when I was researching this accident scene, I was able to find one of the very first photos taken and posted. As you can see, this is an image before all of the people show up. This is already a damaged ambulance. You see they put a tarp over the back window, and there's tape trying to stop the glass from fracturing further. And right here's the horse. So the horse is still alive after after it was hit. So somebody probably came and put the horse out of its misery afterwards. You could see the cart that it was pulling and the second vehicle that was hit. So what happened is, more than likely, when the horse was hit, the people who were on the cart got thrown off, and you see all of them collected here. Again, extremely graphic. It's terrible, but as you can see, there's no smoke, there's no fire, there's no shrapnel, all the vehicles, none of the overpressure has blown out any of the glass that you would expect in an explosion. There obviously is the horse. As I said, somebody probably came up and shot him afterwards. Okay, now this was claimed by Hamas to be the ambulance that was destroyed in the airstrike by Israel. Now, I'll show you a couple of images of ambulances of what they actually look like if they are hit by a missile or an airstrike or actually directly targeted by military hardware. So once again, this is the ambulance that made the news. This is the one that Thomas Levine and the many news outlets ran with. This is what an ambulance looks like when it is actually hit by a missile or a bomb, mortars. You see obvious shrapnels, the windows are blown out, there's obvious roof damage from probably the impact point. Again, this is what it looks like if it's close to an impact point. And again, this is the destruction that you see. As you see, the most likely, whatever round came in, hit the ambulance through the top of the roof of the ambulance. Now, of course, Hamas's health ministry blamed all of those deaths on the IDF and that 32,000 number, again, inflated by a simple car accident, not the cause of the IDF soldiers who clearly did not attack that ambulance. Again, the IDF did say that they hit an ambulance that had Hamas fighters in, but that is not the images that we were portrayed, and the ones that Hamas is claiming were part of the deaths that were caused by IDF. It was actually a car accident where a horse was hit by an ambulance that was pulling a cart that people were on, and then they were thrown off. Next, there were also, when the IDF was opening up the Salah al-Din highway for people to evacuate, there were explosions on that highway, and they were, of course, blamed on the IDF. Now, looking at these, the first one I'm going to show you looks to me very clearly to be maybe not an intentional V-bed bombing, but more likely that this vehicle was carrying explosives and then exploded along the route. And of course, this was put out as Israel attacking the evacuation route. So again, we'll show this. Again, there's no indication that this was actually an attack, and those of us who know what V-beds look like have seen the explosions. You can kind of tell the difference between a vehicle that is hit from an external object versus the explosion when the detonation is internal to the vehicle. So this is the still shots from the video that I took. As you can see, this is the frame right before the explosion. Here's the explosion starting, and you see this mushroom out of of the explosive material. This is the video in real time showing the actual explosion. Back this up here and we'll take it frame by frame. As you can see, with any missile or mortar attack or anything of that nature, the missiles generally fly slow enough that you can catch them in the frame rate of the video. Here you'll see in the very first frame where there's the explosion right there. There's nothing inbound. There's nothing coming in. And the explosion is out and then up, indicating most likely that the vehicle itself detonated without any external impact. There was no missile strike in this case. Now, of course, the Hamas health ministry blamed that on Israel and I can't remember what their casualty count they said was. But again, not deaths attributable to the IDF, but they are included in that 32,000 death count. Now, there was a larger attack right around the 16th of October, around the same time, that the Hamas again claimed was carried out by the IDF, and I think there's sufficient evidence to show that it is unlikely true. Now, in this attack that was reported by the BBC here on October 16th, what we actually know from the video. So I've gone through this and looked at it, and what happened is, this is again the route where people were told to evacuate, and the reporting from the public source did a pretty good job of putting it together. They did some analysis using shadows to geolocate and the time of day to confirm the attack. Now, here's where they get their analysis wrong. Right here you can see that from the witness statements and the video immediately after, it was most likely a mortar attack. Now, it's unlikely that the IDF is going to go ahead and use mortars on an attack, but then here they try to make the insinuation that the mortar fin that they found is in fact an 81 millimeter M43. I just want to point out that the tail fin of the 81 millimeter is much more narrow and longer than the tail fin that is in this video, and I'm going to show you the source reporting of this. So this comes from this video, the journalist, and I'm going to show you the video and pause it right when we get to where the tail fin of the mortar is seen in the video. So right here. So right here is the image of the mortar. I'll go back to here. Now, again, the U.S. uses a much more narrow neck on the tail fins, but what does that actually look like? The short stockiness of it? The 82 millimeter. The 82 millimeter is used by the Iranians. So what is most likely in this incident, where Hamas claimed that 70 people were killed and 200 were injured, and then of course they blamed it on the Israelis, what actually most likely happened is Hamas militants bombed the evacuation route in order to blame Israel. As you see, the tail fin is much shorter, much stockier, and lines up much more in common. It looks much more like the tail fin of the 82 millimeter used by the Iranians. They're one of the few, and Iraqis who use it. So again, these are casualties which Hamas claims were done by Israel, but highly unlikely were actually done by Israel. And the last thing I want to do to kind of wrap this up, I know it's gone on a little bit longer than I planned to do it, but is this article that was published in Newsweek not too long ago by a West Point by John Spencer, and he's talking about the methods that the Israelis go through, the IDF go through to limit civilian casualties. And it does things that the U.S. military doesn't do. They do things that we never did in Iraq, we never did in Afghanistan. And he's talking about how the actual number of casualties, civilian casualties, in relation to the number of combatants killed is extremely low, and it's one of the lowest in history of modern warfare, and particularly when we come to urban warfare. So in his analysis, some of the things he talks about, that Israel made over 70,000 direct phone calls, sent 13 million text messages, 15 million pre-recorded voicemails to civilians telling them they need to get out of the area. They dropped 7 million flyers. They dropped Radios, drones would drop radios that when they hit the ground, they would play a pre-recorded message. And the intent was to get civilians out of the area. But that's not all they did. I mean, the U.S. military, we've done that. We drop the pamphlets. We tell people to get away with loudspeakers. That's fairly common operating procedure. But when he goes into a little bit more detail about what the IDF is actually doing, they have a civilian mitigation unit, and they give out maps to the civilians saying this is where the IDF is going to be operating. So Hamas knows at all points in time where the IDF soldiers are going to be within Gaza, and they provide these routes. Remember, IDF created an evacuation route, which Hamas clearly, I believe, is fairly sufficient to prove that those attacks that were done on those evacuation routes were actually done by Hamas in order to get people like Zaid to believe that it was actually the Israelis. Again, the evidence I don't believe supports those attacks. Now, does Israel kill civilians? Yes, that happens. That's war. It's unfortunate. And as much as we wish that we could never kill a single civilian, that doesn't happen. And obviously I know this because I spent a year in Afghanistan. Civilian casualties, unfortunately, are part of urban warfare. So the Israelis are giving out all of their information. They have, in essence, very little that they keep. And they give routes saying, okay, you guys have this 4-hour window every day for 2 weeks, allowed civilians to leave. Now, the IDF estimates that it's killed about 13,000 people. Hamas's health ministry says that just under 33,000 people have died. Let's say that is accurate. So the Israelis killed 13,000 Hamas fighters. Obviously, the Hamas ministry never states that anyone killed is a Hamas fighter. They're always all civilians and always women and children. So that would mean 20,000 civilians and 13,000 Hamas fighters. That's better. That's less than a 2-to-1 ratio. And as Spencer goes through in this article, we're talking 1.5 to 1.1, which is an extremely low number of civilian casualties to combatants. And the UN, the EU say that generally that ratio is closer to 1 to 9. So 1 combatant killed for every 9 civilians killed. So an extremely high ratio. So even given Hamas's clearly inflated casualties from IDF sources, even if we took that at face value, the number, and we could even reduce the number of Hamas fighters that were killed that Israel claims and say we reduce it by nearly 25%, say it's 10,000 to 22,000, you're still talking just over a 2-to-1 ratio, which would be significantly less than anything the United States has ever done. So this claim that the Israelis are committing genocide, or that the numbers, again, Zed, the numbers that Hamas puts out are complete crap. And yes, that article debunking it was not Holocaust denialism, but reality. And that's what you need to come to grasp with, that the figures put out by Hamas are complete bullshit. They are inflating the numbers that are killed. And I think I've done a pretty good job establishing that those numbers are always inflated, and that any death is attributed to the Israelis, even when it very clearly and very likely is not. So this video obviously went on much longer than any of my others, but I felt it was important to address these claims in detail, just kind of show some of those things off the top of my head that I could very clearly provide, I think, convincing evidence. Obviously, it isn't proof, but enough so that the narrative pushed by the Hamas propagandists and is believed by many on the left. And I didn't even go over the lie pushed by Aaron Mate and Ryan Grimm and Katie Halper that some of the casualties at the Nova Festival were actually done by the Israeli military from an Apache gunship. Now, of course, what those dolts couldn't understand is the video that they were perpetrating out and saying that an Apache gunship is actually what killed the people at the Nova Festival. The Nova Festival killings took place during the middle of the day, but the video that they put out is very clearly a night vision video. So that should have been their first hint. Now, when you actually geolocate the terrain from the video, it actually shows an area away from the Nova Festival, several kilometers away, where there was a breach in the wall. And that's where the IDF had gone on the night of October the 7th. I believe 7th or 8th. In my Twitter thread, I had said the 9th, but that's when the video was released. But the actual video was from the night of the 7th or 8th. So, and again, not at the Nova Festival, but people like Katie Halper, who is absolutely less than room temperature IQ, has stated that the Israelis killed their own. That did not happen. Anyways, if you like this video, please like, comment, share. I appreciate your support. And again, Zed, I hope that you have an ability to go out and touch grass, get back to reality and being the awesome person that I think that you truly are. Once again, my name is Chris Manning, and this is Liberty's Last Refuge.